Welcome back to Telltale Books. This time I've got a video I've been promising you for a long time. I've always had a curiosity about this author, but never went so far as to pick up her work and read it. Well, she released a new book last August or September, I forget which, called Breathe. So I pre-ordered it.
It's Joyce Carol Oates, by the way.
Yeah. And this is how nuts I am. I've never read anything by Joyce Carol Oates. So her new book is coming out. I pre-order a signed copy.
Just in case.
Like I love her work.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I kind of figured I was going to love her work. I've read articles about her where people have said that she is in line for a Nobel Prize for Literature. Mm-hmm. She's been around a long time, writing since the early 1960s, and she doesn't just write horror and thriller. She writes very literary works, mm-hmm. but she has written a lot of them to have a horror or thriller mm-hmm. subject. Mm-hmm. But she writes it in a way that isn't like your latest bestseller.
Yeah.
It isn't pop culture. It is deeper. I haven't read this yet, but I have another book by her called Blonde, where she writes the biography of Marilyn Monroe,
Ooh.
But from Marilyn Monroe's point of view.
That's so interesting.
And she does that a lot. She takes her character and she takes you into the mind of the character. And I'm talking like I've read a lot of her work. No, I've really only read this one. Mm-hmm. But she did that in here too, where the story, it isn't so much about a series of events around the character. It's about what's going on in the character's head. Mm. And in this one in particular, Breathe, it's not horror, it's not thriller. And it's not an easy book to read.
Mm-mm. You told me a little bit about it earlier, but
the basic story is these two professors, husband and wife, mm-hmm. they take jobs at a university in New Mexico, I believe, in what's the town? The biggest town out there, Albuquerque.
Albuquerque.
I believe it's in Albuquerque, if I remember right. So they're professors at the university out there, and during this time, he gets cancer. Mm. First half of the book, he's in the hospital with cancer, dying. Mm-hmm. Middle of the book, he passes away. The second half of the book is her dealing with it. Mm-hmm. The whole book is told from her point of view. You're inside her head, mm-hmm. seeing what she goes through, the thoughts she goes through, and she's an older woman. She kind of starts becoming demented. Reality and fantasy start getting mixed up. Mm. And she, as you're reading through the book, there'll be a whole chapter talking about something, and then the next chapter you found out that was all a fantasy in her head. Mm-hmm. And it just keeps going deeper and deeper into this until in the second half, you don't know what's real in this story and what's fake. Mm-hmm. It's just so... disconnected. Mm-hmm. You can't tell the real events from the fake events. Mm-hmm. And with somebody whose mother is in memory care with dementia, mm-hmm. And the way that she substitutes real memories for made up stories, mm-hmm. that she's talking and you're just listening to her and it's going, what the heck is this coming from? Yeah. It's just such total bullshit coming mm-hmm. out of her mouth, but she doesn't have the memories anymore, mm-hmm. so she fills it in with what her mind makes up. Yeah. And there's a lot of that going in here where, she fills in what she doesn't want to have happening with what she would like to have happening. Mm-hmm. She keeps believing he's going to come back. Mm-hmm. She keeps believing he's going to walk in the door. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of that. And it becomes kind of a fantasy story because of that. It's very surreal and very fantastic. And in the end, you find out that, most of the second half of the book was not even reality. Mm-hmm.
It was wishful thinking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a brilliant novel. about the mind of an older person with some memory issues dealing with the death of her spouse. And you're inside her head, so you're seeing it from her point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And it's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. It sounds like a really powerful read.
It is. It is. I was amazed by it. Samantha read it with me. She liked it, but I don't know if she was just being nice or what.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't love it. I loved it, but I'm also disturbed by it.
Mm-hmm.
It was very hard to take, and it was
Yes.
at a time when we had just read The Divine Comedy.
Yes.
I read this. We read Stephen King right after.
Mm-hmm.
It was
a lot of heavy reads, one after the other during that period.
It was death time for us,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Which was weird because we chose to do that right at the beginning of winter, at like the most dead the world could be. Like, what were we thinking?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, the lightest, most positive book I read during that time was And Then There Were None.
Yeah, I think the lightest I read was The Shining, because at least it had a happy ending, sort of.
Sort of.
Ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I would say that put down your latest mega volume fantasy and go out and grab this and read it. Mm-hmm. I love popular literature. I love science fiction. I love fantasy. I'm getting into horror. I'm getting into mystery. Mm-hmm. But this book is amazing. It's a great book. And one that can touch you a lot deeper than, something like ACOTAR or 2061 can ever do.
It deals with real life issues too, because this is something every single person experiences some kind of grief or loss. Mm-hmm. And everybody's, while humans' psyche is pretty much this very similar across the board, there are neurodivergent people who experience loss in such unusual ways. And this seems like a really good work that speaks towards that, where people some people do end up really losing their minds over it and getting caught in the fantasy world. And like, I've watched documentaries on people who have developed schizophrenia and have the alternate personality become their dead cousin or their dead sibling or their dead parent.
Well, and there are people who gaslight people that, you can't tell what they're saying is real. Mm-hmm. Some things they're saying are real, some things are totally bullshit. Yeah. And they're doing that on purpose. Yeah. And you can't tell the difference.
Pathologically lying as a coping mechanism.
Yeah,
it's very common.
Everything that comes out of their mouth you can't trust.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, which I think is what a lot of people tend to use fantasy as escapism. But sometimes real life and the actual experiences of people, not that this is a work of fiction, but we could see this becoming autobiographical very easily.
To an extent. Yeah. I mean, she didn't become demented, obviously. Mm-hmm. She's in her 80s and writing amazing novels, but she did have her husband die. Yeah. And she drew upon that experience for this book.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to honor those experiences because while they are so outside the realm of what we think, it is very common in human psyche to deal with things in this way. Mm-hmm. And I think being able to address big issues, not necessarily for the sake of entertainment, while I believe this is probably somewhat entertaining, not necessarily in the happiest way, but I believe that all works of anything, like art is meant there for you to feel something. It's not always positive. Yeah. But I think it's important because I'm one of those people who does not believe that the meaning of life is being happy. It is to have a full spectrum of human experiences, because why do we otherwise?
Yeah. Yeah, a book like this, like I say, it does touch on personal experiences of a lot of people like me, and so you find a certain connection through it. Mm-hmm.
You do kind of end up finding a lot of relatable things. Like I think one of the books I read was Where the Crawdad Sings. Mm-hmm. That's a hard read. It's a really hard read. It's very emotionally heavy. Mm-hmm. But there's so much humanity in it. Yeah. And it made me feel so much. And there were a lot of very relatable points or very empathic moments where I was just like, I totally understand why that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I totally understand why so-and-so did that. There are some points, too, where it's like, I totally understand why that person committed manslaughter or murder.
Yeah.
I believe I would, in certain very dire situations, have full capacity to do those things. And those make that real to me. And I think embracing our shadows is very important as a culture. We don't do it enough. We don't sit and have, like, come to terms with the fact that there are very ugly parts of ourselves. And there are very unhappy experiences, but they are necessary for growth.
Yeah.
And they are necessary for coping. And I think as a culture, we just want to avoid negativity when negativity is very much a part of our lives.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just the way it is.
Well, and there are a lot of issues like that. Like with my own father, he grew up in the 1930s, 1940s in Racine, Wisconsin. He tells me that back then there was exactly one black family in the entire city, and they kept to themselves. The city was white and white bread and very middle America white, and that's how he grew up. And he grew up at a time when there were certain words we can't say today that everybody used, and nobody batted an eye. Nobody thought it was wrong. It was just the way it was. And so my dad grew up racist, is what it comes down to. Very racist.
Yep.
And so when all the equal rights protests came out by women and by blacks in the 1960s, he was very offended by that. Because it was too big a change. He didn't understand it. The world he came out of wasn't like that.
Yes.
And all of a sudden things were changing and he wasn't understanding it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of negative stuff that happens internally and externally because of that.
Right. So I used to joke that he was Archie Bunker because he was so, he didn't smoke cigars, but he did have his chair. And he did talk a lot like Archie Bunker did. But he has changed so much since then and grown so much since then. I mean, he's still not a perfect person, but I think our lives are like that where, we have those bad things about us, but our life is that journey in growing beyond them. We never become perfect. We never achieve what we're reaching for, but we still do reach for it. We still do try. We fail a lot, but we also succeed in certain ways and make ourselves better so that when we get to our later lives, we are at least better people. Even if there are still some rough edges, even if there are still some things
that is
that
at
you
least
could
the
criticize
goal.
us about.
That should be the goal, at least. Not everybody gets there, but
no. But I think everybody wants to.
Yes.
Even if they fail, it's just some people fail more than others. It's very hard to fight with yourself.
It is. It is. It absolutely is.
Very
and I
hard
think
to struggle
too.
Through that.
Oh, there's this quote that I often bring up with people, and I can't remember who said it, but I have not learned from all that agreed with me. And that's something I bring up with a lot of people because I have a lot of understanding and patience. And a lot of my friends are like, how do you have understanding and patience for that person? They're so rough around the edges, or they have such conflicting ideas compared to you, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, because I don't learn anything from that which always agrees with me. It just affirms my beliefs to have it agree with me. And sometimes I need to have things challenged, because how do I change and grow if I don't have them challenged?
Right.
How do I take action then? And that's the biggest part too, is taking the responsibility to change once you realize something needs addressing and actually addressing it. So a little off topic compared to this book, because I don't know how much growth and change she has in Beast of Literature. I didn't read it. This is all Greg reading this. Yeah.
But it relates to that idea that if you just read happy things,
yeah, if you're just reading for the sake of entertainment, you're missing out.
And sometimes, well, I mean, it is entertaining, but it isn't entertaining in this, Star Wars popcorn kind of way. It's entertaining in a way of connecting with something dark that all of us are going to experience at some time in our lives.
Yeah. It kind of makes it makes the world a little bit more empathic and a little more human, and having a little more compassion reading these things, because it is absolutely 10% of a human, at least 10% of a human experience, especially from the author's perspective. If this is something she's has experienced, at least 10% of it, I'm sure, is true, if not more.
Well, and especially, I mean, obviously I'm not an old woman whose husband has died of cancer, but the story takes you into that perspective.
Yes.
When you're reading the story, you are that old woman whose husband died of cancer, and the whole story is inside her head.
Yes.
And like I say, there's at least one other work by Joyce Carol Oates where she did that, and if she did that a lot through her career, I can see why that would make her one of our most valuable authors, because that's a hard thing to do.
It is.
You know, even if you're drawing on your own experiences, you're still, to really powerfully, truly, completely bring you inside a character like that, instead of just your characters being toy soldiers moving around a stage. That's incredible.
Yes. The ability to make people feel and live it with you as an author is, I think, a huge talent, and speaks a lot to the way that humans can connect with other humans, even having never actually met them in person, which I think is a huge part of being a creative of any kind, especially an author or an artist.
Yeah.
So
I recommend this book.
I want to read it. That's for sure.
I kind of feel that most of the people who follow us would enjoy it if you haven't read it.
So yeah.
Give it a shot.
Go find it. Tell us what you thought of it. I eventually will read it. Along with the list of everything else that we're going to
borrow my copy, but you got to read some of the other stuff you've got first.
I know. I've got so much to get through, but someday.
Yeah.
I'm okay if my to-be-read list outlives me. That just means there's a next generation ready to take it on. So
yeah, there's a lot of books out there, and if we never get to all of them, oh well.
Yeah, that is just the nature of being human and finite.
We never get to do everything.
Yep. Well, thanks for joining us, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.